So I'm going to give you a quick overview. You can see just the outline here about the topics I'm going to try to touch on. I'm going to be flying pretty high and pretty fast because of time constraints, and I don't want to steal anybody else's presentation, particularly Nancy's. We've already talked about not trying to double up on each other. But I want to get you thinking about things, and then hopefully in the question and answer period that we have, that's where we can maybe talk a little bit more about details. So the need and the national interest starts with the Federal Clean Water Act. It requires that we set water quality standards for substances that could reasonably be expected to impact designated uses. Now, designated uses are in Colorado we need to protect water quality so that we can use water for agricultural uses, for public water supplies, for recreation in and on the water, for aquatic life, and for wetlands. So those five uses are what we protect water quality for in all circumstances. So what have we been doing about this nationwide and over the state? Well, nationwide, we know that we have impacts to some of our major estuaries. Gulf of Mexico, Chesapeake Bay, Puget Sound, we all have seen the impacts of excessive nutrients in there. We've also seen impacts to lakes and rivers across the country. The Great Lakes, the Mississippi River, Boise River in Idaho, they all have nutrient problems that have popped up. Federal efforts really intensified to look at this effort in the late 1990s into the early 2000s. States were encouraged to start pursuing nutrient criteria at that time, Colorado certainly being one of those. Some of the states that have been on the forefront of developing nutrient criteria here of late are Florida, Minnesota, Montana, New York, Utah, Wisconsin, and also Colorado. How long has Colorado been working on this? We negotiated our first agreement with EPA to start working on this in 1998, and we developed our first plan to actually start moving forward on developing nutrient criteria in 2000. So it's not something that we have just picked up here in the last year or two or even in the last decade. I mean, we're pushing into our second decade of trying to work on this. So it's been a long-term effort, and it will continue to take us a fair amount of time and effort for us to succeed on that. All right, so quickly, what are the impacts of nutrients? Well, they impact our water supply. They do that by producing a lot of algae. The green you see in our water, the greener the water is, the more carbon there is in the water. The more carbon there is in the water, when you try to disinfect that water with typically chlorine, then you produce residual disinfection byproducts. Those disinfection byproducts can be carcinogenic at high levels. The other problem with water quality is that there can be taste and odor issues with high nutrient water. The next impact is to aquatic life. A natural system is in balance with each other, but as you might imagine, if you put in too many nutrients, then you create an imbalance, and then you can start creating an imbalance in the food web that is depicted here. And typically what happens, you'll see a loss of your most sensitive organisms. Mayflies, caddisflies, any of those type of insects that are endemic to water quality. The third impact and fourth impact are recreation and aquatic life. Recreation use, algal blooms, reduce the appeal of getting in the water. Although when I talk to people in the Midwest, when they see this picture and they go, I'd go swimming in that water. But when I talk to people in Colorado, they go, I wouldn't get in that water. A difference in perspective. It's very interesting on how we look at that, how that difference in perspective. But if algal blooms get too extreme, the algae can produce toxins that are just normal byproducts of their life. They can get too high, and people can start having adverse reactions to those. The other side of things is that too high of algae in water can start consuming the dissolved oxygen out of the water, and then the fish don't have enough oxygen to survive. The last one is impacts agricultural use. The excessive growth of algae can cause problems in our ability to divert and deliver water to users. What do they do in response to that? Well, then typically, they try to treat that vegetation with chemicals to reduce that. Well, that works to a point, but you put too much chemicals in the water, guess what? It stays in the water, it goes downstream, and it has an impact on aquatic life or some other use on there. So there are impacts indirectly to agricultural use. So if we want to look at how to develop criteria to protect these things, we look in general in this matrix. So what we've tried to do in Colorado is to use the best possible science to establish thresholds that are going to protect those uses, and then develop implementation strategies that consider all the relevant aspects of nutrient loading. And that kind of gets back to what Mr. Broderick just said a minute ago. We've got to find a balance of how we're going to protect these things. There's always going to be a push and pull on things, and I thought that was a very good example of where he talked about that water and food and energy triangle. That really kind of struck home with me about how we find balance in things, how we move forward. So if you just look at this, I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Kind of what I talked about is you can see the use categories, but then also the differences between lakes and reservoirs, rivers and streams. So just quickly in summary, for reservoirs, our two competing interests are aquatic life and recreational use. How do we balance those uses between algal abundance? Fishermen like green lakes. It means it's highly productive. There's going to be a big food base there. There's going to be a lot of fish and big fish to catch. Drinking water providers, they like it gin clear. Easier to treat. Don't have to worry about keeping the customer satisfied on that. Lakes and reservoirs, as we've talked about, cities take a lot of this water, and also agricultural interests, and they store this water. So then we're going to have to find the balance between agricultural use of the water and for municipal use of the water. Here again, it's all water, but how do we find the best balance of water quality to do that? In rivers and streams, really we tend to focus on aquatic life. They're our most sensitive species, canaries in the coal mine, if you will. How do we establish nutrient criteria that are going to protect those sensitive species and everything else in that food web that we talked about? And then also in rivers and streams, we also, in Colorado, it's obvious to those of us who live here, is that recreation in and on our waters is a big component of this. So here again, having that water so that it is appealing enough that people want to get in it and enjoy, and will continue to get in it and recreate on it. So what are we doing to implement controls for our point sources, which are primarily discharges out of discrete pipes, conveyances, and non-point sources? Those things more like runoff off of the land, runoff from agriculture, or from, we have impacts from mining, or you can have impacts from forestry on that. So one of the things that we've done recently is that in 2010, the Water Quality Control Commission, which is the 9-member governor-appointed body that adopts policy for water quality across the state, we now have provisions where we can give a discharger a specific variance of a standard if there is great difficulty in trying to achieve that. So that was one of the first steps that we've done. We've always had site-specific standards that where, based on good analysis or good data collection and good analysis, we can go and say, we're going to really narrow in on this segment and we're going to set something that's site-specific. It could be a little bit more stringent than average, or it could be a little bit more relaxed than average. But we've got the data to support that, and the commission agrees with that. And then always compliance schedules. That's dealing with facilities that may be having trouble with things, that there is flexibility to give them time to determine how best to bring their facilities up to snuff so that they can discharge water that protects all of those uses that we've talked about. So what we have done over the last couple of years is that we're proposing a regulatory approach statewide for managing nutrients. Regulation 31, that's our heavyweight of regulations. That's our basic standards for surface water. That's where we start on developing standards that then go to all the different basins of the state. So what we've done is we've proposed interim numeric values for nitrogen, phosphorus, and chlorophyll in this standard. It's a brand new subsection on this. The Commission, as scheduled right now, is to have a hearing in March 2012 to hear this action. The first thing that we would try to deal with is phosphorus in the first 5 years, from 2012 to 2017, 2017 to 2022. The next 5 years is when we start dealing with nitrogen. Phosphorus is a little bit easier to deal with, nitrogen less so. We want to try to look at all waters of the state, but we have two primary areas that we want to look at. We want to look at primarily waters located upstream of permitted point source discharges, and we also want to look at reservoirs where that are being used for public water supplies. So what that gets us to is our highest quality waters at elevation, more or less, but then also those public water supplies. The next one we have is then, okay, they're obviously, we want to try to look at areas that we can control in the short term. Those are primarily going to be point source discharges. A lot of those are going to be municipal point source discharges, but there also are industrial types too. We recognize that there are going to be problems with small communities or disadvantaged communities. Small communities, we're looking at those that anything over or under 500,000 gallons per day discharge. Disadvantaged community is any community where the statewide median household income is less than that. We want to look at trying to get things in place shortly after the March 2012 hearing, moving forward with total phosphorus and total inorganic nitrogen limits for municipal dischargers beginning in 2012 at one area, and then we have another area which Nancy is going to talk about a little bit more about the numbers. I'm trying not to use the numbers right now, Nancy, so because I want Nancy to speak to those. And maybe I'll just leave it at that. I'm going to let Nancy speak to those so I don't steal her part of her presentation. She'll get more into those. But here again, the implementation tools. We're looking at compliance schedules for facilities that could go out for 20 or 30 years for facilities to make necessary changes over time. We're looking at exemptions to effluent limits in particularly difficult cases that where we can justify that, and then we've also talked about the variances to standards where we think that is appropriate. The other area we need to look at is municipal separate storm sewer systems, MS4s. They can convey nutrients into the system. What we want to do is a continuation of what is already in place, which is a big public outreach program, and more specifically targeting on nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and what might be the sources of those in our urban areas, and what we might do to better educate the public and what they can do to reduce the potential loss of those nutrients into the storm sewers. And then also, just within municipalities themselves, better operational and management programs for them to manage their operations so that they minimize nutrient loss and then getting it into our waterways. The other one that we have to look at then is the non-point source side of things. Here again, we typically address non-point sources with best management practices. Those are just activities that we can put in place that will minimize or maybe even eliminate the migration of nutrients off the land and getting into the water. We want to, but the main difference here is that non-point source controls are voluntary. They've been specified as voluntary under federal and state law since the inception. So what we have to do is try to encourage the voluntary adoption BMPs that we know will reduce nutrients. One area that we're putting a little bit more encouragement on is where agricultural operations, where they actually add fertilizer. We want to encourage the development of nutrient management plans. We need to be able to better document the use and management of nutrients, and then be comfortable in the reductions that we're going to achieve with that. Another piece is public information and education, informing people about the impacts of nutrients, and then hopefully through behavior changes that over time that we'll see reductions in that. Additional future actions, if at the end of 10 years the Commission sees that these actions aren't being effective, at 10 years they could consider requiring another click on the non-point source BMP dial, if you will. Are there additional actions that we need to do to start getting non-point sources, whatever they may be, to start reducing things? And then also, particularly related to ag, there is a coordination piece between the Water Quality Control Commission and the Commissioner of Agriculture, where they could look at specific agricultural areas and try to decide, do we need to bring more focus to bear on those areas? But that would not be for a minimum of 10 years, and maybe even longer if we can be successful with voluntary controls. As you might imagine, we think it's prudent that behind all these activities that we do some monitoring to see how successful it will be. So we want to establish a monitoring program that evaluates the effectiveness of the control regulation and tries to start teasing out what are the impacts from point sources and non-point sources in each one of the basins. We've got a pretty good start on data, but as you might imagine, you never have all the data you need until you really focus in on answering those questions. So there are monitoring for the point sources and the non-point sources, and those will be reported back to the Commission on a regular basis for their consideration. So here's kind of the wrap up. The schedule of things is here again. The Commission is considering this in March of 2012. We've already postponed this hearing twice. It was supposed to have taken place in June of 2010, but because of concerns and requests for additional time, the Commission has postponed that back. You can kind of see the effective dates for the parameters of interest here. We have been engaged extensively with stakeholders on this process. The Nutrient Work Group, sponsored through the Colorado Water Quality Forum, we have been taking comments back and have been working on revisions to our proposed regulations. The next round of revisions, the division will put out for public review and comment is going to be late May, early June. That will then continue the dialogue on that. Another kind of late-breaking activity on this was that there has been concerns expressed about, well, what are going to be the economic impacts of rolling out additional nutrient controls across the state? The Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority was approached to fund a cost-benefit study, statewide cost-benefit study, and as of last Friday, they have approved almost $500,000 to hire a contractor to do that study. The contractor is moving forward as we speak this week. That study is to be completed in October of 2011, and the cost-benefit study will be used as part of the information given to the Water Quality Control Commission for that March 2012 ruling.